Almost. All right, good morning. 9:05, Friday, November 22nd, Beach Preservation Ad Hoc Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. So in your packet this time, staff, thank you all for prepping the recommendations. So let's take a little bit different tact today if we can. So we've tried to capture all the recommendations that we've talked about for the last 10 months, something like that. And I hope we have it. This is in the format of what was done in 07, 08, last time there was a group like this put together. And it was set up the same way with consensus, general agreement, divided, but at the time, and we can decide how we want to do it here too, what got served up to council was kind of, here's everything we looked at. And, you know, on some of these items, full agreement, some of these items, not full agreement, but for council's purposes, everything was looked at. So that's kind of why it was set up the way it was set up. So I'd love to just walk through each of these today to see where we are from a consensus, because we've all opined ad nauseum at some times, but we've all opined, but we really haven't just kind of definitively put a stake in the ground literally to say, I'm good with doing X, I'm not good with doing Y, so we're just going to almost treat it like a council meeting today and walk through each one of these and vote, essentially, just so we can start kind of tying this off, if you will, around getting a report out to council. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So I hope you've had a chance to at least read through the 3-page document. So it's a draft report to City Council, some background that staff had put in there with our original objectives and number of meetings and such. So it's divided into 3 categories. First one being beach restoration policies. So the first one is establish a minimum healthy beach volume profile per figure 5, which is in the CSE report, which is approximately 600 cubic yards per foot within the unstabilized zone, inlet zones, and 380 cubic yards per foot elsewhere on the beach. I think we've had general consensus on that, but is everybody good with those numbers?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we were okay with that. We talked about some dune triggers too. I don't know if that's,
That's
oh,
true.
maybe that's just the next one down.
Next
Sure.
one.
Okay. Yeah. I'm-
Dan, Cindy, are they good?
Yeah, I would just say, subject to if we get a second opinion, yes, absolutely.
Second opinions on the list.
Right, I said, subject, right, just clearly if that would change something in
Right.
the future, but yes.
So consensus there, establish triggers for when council should consider authorizing construction of mid-scale and large-scale projects. That's an exhibit in the CSE document. I think we have consensus on absolutely having triggers when city council / staff would start the permitting process and down that. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Scott,
The only,
go
well,
ahead.
the only question I had there, you're talking about the CSE. I thought we had that other list with the,
Yeah, they're kind of partner documents, but you're right.
There's more in-
It's not in the CSC document. It's in that kind of worksheet that we were working down, but we'll package
Got it.
that
okay,
a
And
little
reference
tidier.
that, and reference that document.
okay.
That's why it says see Exhibit X.
Is that Exhibit X?
Exhibit X.
Yes.
Oh, Exhibit X,
developed.
to the,
To be
we gotta fill
developed.
that one in,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Appendix.
Okay.
Scott,
And
you're
this
you're
one-
thinking we've met so long, we probably are on Exhibit X.
I
That's just a
was
placeholder.
expecting double letters by now. Double letters, double numbers, yeah.
I will also say that some of these go hand in hand with some of the items under the proactive
Yeah.
section. So we talked about having a permit on hand and every time, so just keep that in mind, that some of these will,
Crossover.
will cross over at some point, yeah.
Next item is consider becoming a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers managed beach. You know, we've already put the request in to get in line, if you will, just for the feasibility study. So again, I think there's consensus on taking that next step, since we've already done it.
And we'll include the letter, I know that's not part of the
In this
packet.
packet.
But once we have a final document, we'll include the letter that has been submitted and their response.
Okay. Next, city performs emergency work, sand scraping, trucking in sand, and/or placement of sandbags to protect private property as long as newly established beach preservation emergency fund allows it. And I know this one, I may be the only divided party on this one, but thoughts, comments, votes, yes, no, on city performing emergency work? And again, Scott, and to everybody's comment, a lot of this goes very hand in hand. If if we pulled our hands off the emergency work, we're going to talk in a minute about seawalls and revetments and such. So, I mean, again, some of this goes hand in hand, but thoughts
So
on this one?
Could
Go ahead.
could we jump to the seawall for a moment? If I could just address that for just a second, and then I agree with you that I think they go hand in hand. And I also would love, Philip, to work as we go through this to, if we can come to a consensus on the emergency, if you're the holdout, maybe expressing what would, and on any of these, because I think we've all become a pretty cohesive group that can listen and be better to go with consensus than any division,
Yeah,
if
but
possible,
it's
on any
okay.
of them. And
Yeah.
I'll try to absolutely do the same. So,
Yeah, so let's hop to the
so
next
if
one.
we
So,
can, I did some homework, and I want to thank Katie and Andrew for making me think some more. So, I got stuff. So, went through and looked at a number of things, and I'm going to be very quick, but I'm going to try to be thorough. And so basically, and what I found in the research is that, and obviously Stephen can jump in at any time, is that three things that I found were good for these beaches, barrier islands: renourishment, dunes management, which we all agreed on, and what they referred to as a subsurface structures. So instead of a hard erosion device as that term or a seawall, they're called subsurface structures. So I learned something. And again, this was based on what you'd asked about, and specifically when you said, what do we do about these large properties with accretion? And I walked out of here going, that is such a good question, and I want to make sure that I'm thinking more clearly. So looked into subsurface structures, now that I know the official word. First, they are not a seawall. And then looking at the literature and using some chat GBT, to be honest, as well, to get some of these answers. It says the subsurface ones compared to seawalls are healthier for the beach. They mimic the natural processes, preserving sediment transport and habitats. Seawalls reflect wave energy, often causing beach narrowing or loss. So these are not seawalls. So they're saying that's what's bad about seawalls and why they're different, where the subsurface devices are better. They're environmentally sustainable. Subsurface devices support biodiversity and natural aesthetics. Seawalls can disrupt ecosystems and sediment dynamics. So, again, your concerns and the concerns we had seawalls are very valid. But again, we're not talking a seawall, and that was what I wanted to be clear about. Conclusion that they come up with: subsurface devices are generally better for long-term coastal health. So moving forward from that, looked at the Folly, and Folly says in their 2021 City of Folly Beach Local Comprehensive Beachfront Management Plan that the Army Corps says, and this is here, not this one, I think it's the next one, goes on and basically in summary says private land loss causes the beach to erode more quickly than otherwise. So they prefer that they have these subsurface devices to prevent the land loss. So in other words, what I learned is that if you've got a rectangular property, so let's think of those big lots, just as an example, and you put one of these walls here, Army Corps likes that because basically it does a couple things. One, it delineates what the city is going to do under the emergency plan, and what we are going to do as private homeowners, because suddenly you've got a subsurface wall that nobody sees, but in the event there's an emergency event and it becomes exposed, I, as the homeowner, am going to be filling in the rectangle, not the city. And so, but also it's saving and preventing that sand from leaving when this all happens. So when there's a hurricane or a mild one, nothing's going to say a Category 5 isn't going to take over, is that sand is staying. So we're not having to go and replenish that sand, either me or the city. So the Army Corps is a fan of these subsurface structures and encourages them on Folly for the purpose of retaining the sand. Again, they delineate who has responsibility and allows for segregated upkeep, which reduces the emergency measures. So if you've got these subsurface devices, then you're not having to scrape that piece of property. You're not having to bring sandbags onto that piece of property. You're not losing sand. You're not having to renourish that piece of property. If that moves forward, then suddenly the city is invading into that space with the amount of emergency work that they may be required to do or doing. or the Army Corps. So it goes for everyone who's trying to keep the beach healthy. It's keeping the beach in the playground, kind of building a sandbox, but it's subsurface. So basically, they work synergistically with the beach renourishment. They provide stability to the renourished sand. They reduce the likelihood of immediate loss of sand, and they better protect the private property and the beach. Then, as a result, that saves the town and the property owners money, property owners from damage and renourishment, and the city from any of these emergencies. So with that in mind, what I suggest, based on the other research I've done, it would be removal of the ordinance altogether. And that one, I talked last week about it being moot, that it was basically had been put out there in the 90s to keep another row of property from being built. It wasn't as much an issue as regards not liking underground walls. It would have allowed another Ocean Boulevard 2 if there had been further accretion. And the city didn't want that, probably a response to J.C. Long's actions on Ocean Boulevard. As for these long lots, one of the things that came to mind after I left is that these longer lots that have accretion, they, as the ordinance stands now, can build a wall. The ordinance allows 250 feet in from mean high tide, I think. So if they wanted to build a wall, they could build one now, and for what I know, they haven't. So I wouldn't think there's gonna be a rush on those. Plus, if they build one, they're suddenly gonna be, they have, depending on how close they come in, they'll have more responsibility for their own property. Finally, the other islands don't have these, and one of the
These
things by
being-
not
these being the
having,
ordinances, you mean?
they don't have these ordinances, and other islands do allow these, and they've been built, and we don't see that in the newspaper as a problem. And then E, when we try to, and have tried to create a new ordinance, what we ended up with was a document that was full of a lot of legalese and requirements to protect the city from future liability. And what it did in effect was make it impossible or impracticable for homeowners to build walls, and hence no one was able to do it. And finally, the state and OCRM do not still do not prohibit these subsurface walls on private property. So we really have just put a lot of to do about something that no one else has found was necessary, and we're in no better place because of this ordinance. So sorry that I rushed through all that, but I really wanted to get that out, and I have a doctor's appointment, so I was gonna have to leave early.
All right, so let's keep rocking here. I want
There
to
you
get
go.
through
You
this
got it all.
list. Modify, look, so we'll skip to the hard erosion first. Modify prohibition on hard erosion control structures outside of the state's jurisdictions. And we put in 3 options just based on conversations at this committee as well as council. So first one, allow hard erosion control structures anywhere outside state's jurisdiction, anywhere within 20 feet of the line, or not at all.
Should we add
Go ahead,
one
Scott.
that says, and maybe it's the one, maybe it's before that, and that would be the remove the ordinance, because if we remove the ordinance, then A, B, C, and D don't really, I think that's where you were going.
That's where
I
that
would
feels
support that as an
strongly.
alternative because it makes sense based on the presentation you just gave.
So Douglas, what's
So it should
your-
really
yeah.
be, I mean, those 4 are really all together. It's,
But A would be first. A would be I mean, if you're going from most
So-
extreme, one extreme to the other. is what
correct.
you're trying
So,
to do.
so I would say,
Remove the ordinance.
see if there's consensus on A, B, or C, and the answer to that will drive the answer to the question above.
I would kind of go in the reverse. I'd see if there's consensus on remove the ordinance, because then B, C, and D don't,
They fall
they don't
fall
apply.
away.
So
for-
a complete removal would be choosing A,
Would be
The new A.
would be
There's only
the
one
only.
A.
There's only one A.
No, I'm saying A is we can allow hard erosion control structures outside state's jurisdiction.
Correct.
Right
If you-
now-
If you choose A, you are doing away with the city's prohibition.
250 feet.
Okay, can we just modify that to state that is really, the action here is to remove the ordinance?
So I think
Is that-
maybe it's.
am I
That's
mistaken?
correct. No, that's
But
A.
Maybe it's a little bit different because.
So it's either it's either complete kind of repeal or a modification of something else?
I don't think so. And maybe you're right at the end of the day, but to me, it seems like they're 2 very different things. One is remove the ordinance,
Right?
and it's gone. Another one is keep the ordinance, but allow the erosion control substances anywhere outside the state's jurisdiction. asking the city to remove an ordinance might be a whole lot different challenge than asking them to allow erosion control structures. I think they're two different things.
Well, that's
And
the
I think people could vote
modification.
on them in
Yeah, it
alternatives,
is.
but
It's a mod. go ahead.
That's a modification. So if you don't want to completely repeal it, which would allow any structure to be outside of the state's jurisdiction, and the current restriction, which they are only allowed within 250 feet from the mean high water, you're taking that, all of that out. So they could be
so one would be a total repeal.
correct.
Two would be allow the hard control structures under, that's the current A. Then three would be B, and four would be C.
So if you allow or hard erosion control
Is that a
structures
complete
with,
repeal?
that's a complete
Correct.
repeal.
Okay.
Right now, they're prohibited, so you're repealing that.
But are there other conditions or terms within that ordinance that is beyond just allowing hard erosion
No.
controls? Nothing at all?
No,
And Douglas, if you moved
you could,
to the, well, go ahead.
so I think I think A, B, and C is it. You either get out of the business and
Yep.
say, state, in your jurisdiction, you manage it. Landward of the state's line, you can do whatever, or you could modify it to be
Some other flavor.
some other flavor, which I would say you could do flavors of B. B is, so we specifically chose B, I think, because that's the one that a majority of council enacted once, so I think we thought that was kind of the,
Right.
Well, I'll just give you an example, sorry to interrupt you, but, so if we say, at one point, we were talking about, let's go 20 feet back from the setback line.
that's B.
Well, no, so that's different flavor. So when we say allow hard erosion control structures anywhere outside state's jurisdiction, that can be anywhere from the setback line to anywhere.
Well, we would
And-
say critical line.
Okay, critical line. So all I'm saying is that by letting B stand and not having just removed the ordinance altogether, which then opens up all of the territory between, say, critical line and the private property, basically. What B allows us to consider other flavors of B.
That's correct.
And I
Yeah,
don't wanna-
B is in there as a generic modification, so I would look at these as A is get rid of it entirely, B is keep something but modify it. We have 20 feet from the max building line as a placeholder, and C is don't touch it. So those are kind of the,
So keep in mind, they're allowed today as long as they are within 250 feet
That's
from
exactly
the
right.
mean
So-
high
so
water. More than
there's a
250.
wordplay maybe we should pay attention to, which is this. You know, one thing that I've heard is that, you know, some people are worried about, you know, for example, you go back to when the south end of the beach was allowed to put in a wall, but they had to have an engineer that said it's not going to impact the neighbors. And the city is then taking, the concern of the city, I'm assuming, was they don't want to take on responsibility of having liability for somebody saying that you've allowed this to be done. There's a difference in A, where the city is allowing something to be done, and a repeal. And it may be a word difference, but if you have a repeal, you're saying, listen, if we follow what Cindy has presented just now, the logic is the ordinance was created for a reason that no longer exists because of the J.C. Long, or the way the lots are developed now. It doesn't exist. It wasn't for the purpose of regulating seawalls. It was for the purpose of managing how far out you can have on your road. Let me just finish real quick.
I would just say, I don't know, my understanding of history is
Yeah,
different than
I was
that.
gonna say,
You
I'm
know,
not sure
maybe we
that's
should
factual.
Look into that a little more. But if you follow that logic, then by repealing it, what you're saying is, we're not allowing it, we're not disallowing it. We're just not involved with it. We're not regulating it. And if you can do it on your own, that's between you and your neighbors, and everybody else. It's not something we're gonna be involved in. What A says is allowing it, which means the city is saying we are blessing it. So I think they are two different things.
I do too.
And, you know, just from a micro look at it, I think we should frame them differently. And I don't think it costs anything to do it differently.
So let's say this, we're getting hung up like we have for 10 months. Can we just parenthetically say this would repeal the 250-foot line?
Would you rather, would it make it clear to say A is repeal it, B is modify it, C is do nothing? Does that?
Maybe.
simplify,
yes.
and then we could
Yeah.
work on the flavor, if you want to modify.
Yeah, we don't need to try and solve it here. We're just
Yeah.
serving up. I mean, Dan, does that do it? Repeal, modify, or leave it alone?
A, I'm going to say is,
Repeal
Repeal.
current ordinance.
Scott, does that get you
Yeah,
there?
no, I think that gets us there.
B is modify, and then if you land on B, we can talk about what the
Where?
modification is.
B allows and modifies or whatever, yeah.
Correct.
And C is
Keep it
keep it.
Yeah.
as
that
is,
works.
as is.
Yeah.
That works,
'Cause
yeah,
if-
that does it.
So do we know
So
about?
then, therefore,
Yeah.
go ahead, Douglas.
So, just to kind of back up a little bit, I wanted to just say that from when we were developing this chart, we generally took consensus as kind of
Head nods.
kind of three-quarters of a group, not
May or
unanimous.
may not have been unanimous, yeah.
Correct.
General agreement, we took as a majority, and divided, we just were something less than that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that, I mean, is that?
No, that's, however, it's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
We can define it when it goes up to council.
yeah, I think hopefully
get
we're
where
gonna
you're
have,
going.
hopefully we're gonna have one more run at whatever the final
Sure, of
document
course.
is before it rolls up, but, and I think you know where I stand, I would jump on A for this one.
Yeah, so let's talk A. So now A says repeal.
Repeal it.
Repeal.
Who's up for that? 2, 3.
I'm not for
And
repeal.
I can't,
No, not here.
I don't have proxy, but we did meet with Tim yesterday on the other issue, looking at the.
Yeah,
other-
don't have proxy.
I don't have proxy,
Next
but
is
he's well
modify. I'm good with
I'm good with
that.
modifying.
So I think this is going to be a divided one, Douglas.
So 2 to 3,
So I thought if it was majority, it's
Majority,
general
yeah.
agreement. That's what you said, wasn't it?
And then do nothing. I think there's consensus to
Yeah.
not do nothing.
Yeah, there's,
Double negative.
we gotta do something. We need to adjust the policy.
All right, so given that, if we pop back up to emergency work.
I'm so torn on this one. I really,
I'm out.
I'm not
Well, can I
for,
ask-
Yeah.
I think I'd like to see the nourishment where we don't have to do work on private property. I just don't like using public money to protect private property. It just doesn't sit well with me.
So can I ask a question, and I guess this might be a question to Cindy, just so I make sure I understood what you said. You were very quick.
know.
But no, I think I got it. If we did, if we kind of got out of the way and the resident, this then by default then requires the resident to be responsible for their own personal property. Is that correct, or did I kind of understand that?
Well,
Up to the point where they
Up
have
to
the.
some level.
If
yeah.
if they choose to have this subsurface structure, then that creates a fine delineation, which is a reason to encourage those.
There's some demarcation.
But the hard part is demarcating when they aren't there, because what happens is you keep losing sand, and jurisdiction keeps moving, so the homeowner loses some of their proactive and responsive abilities. So that's what makes it, it's hard. It's because the line keeps moving, just like the easements move. I mean, it's a really difficult situation. Yes,
I
once
like-
we renourish, and if multiple people start demarcating, then we get less in the business of emergency.
I
but
want
we
to see a
still have
process like
some.
what we saw from, like what we heard from, what was it, Edisto and others, where it's like,
Yeah.
this is your responsibility, and when we do a nourishment, you've met this mark, and we come up to this point, and we meet, that's where we meet. So that way, it's not everyone in the city to go on to that personal property. They understand expectations are met. They're set for the city and for the private property owner, and that's the line.
So let me try to
And
frame,
with- oh, go ahead,
okay, I was gonna say, let me
please.
try to frame maybe
So-
two
Yeah.
different
Address
scenarios. One scenario is, assume we do our beach renourishment, we get ourselves to a healthy beach. The lines are gonna be pretty clear after that where the private property is and the healthy beach is. I think we're dealing with the emergency situation when we all get behind the 8 ball here like we are now, and we need some emergency funds to do what we can to maintain the healthiest beach we can until the next beach renourishment. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. So the circumstances we're in now, hopefully, if we can get that beach renourishment and get back to the healthy beach profile, we're not gonna be, faced with it for this kind of a duration, so the emergency situation's gonna, Phillips, you're kind of not sure.
Well, I mean, I just
I mean,
think it's
an event's
hard
an event.
to, yeah, it's just hard to
I
say.
agree with
yeah.
that, yes.
And
Go ahead.
With full agreement with that, and I think that the demarcation was if you had this, but also once it's renourished, the dune allowed for some ability to demarcate that they had to be equal levels, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. But looking at this one paragraph from Folly, it says that the private land loss compromises the integrity of the federal project and causes the beach to erode more quickly than it would otherwise. The Army Corps has made it clear that any properties that are allowed to erode behind the renourishment line, so maybe when we do it, that's where a demarcation can become, may be skipped over during the next renourishment. So they agree that that's, but again, it's hard to demarcate now when we're in this perpetual erosion. But-
Yeah, I mean, this is also forward-looking policies.
Yeah.
We want to define it now, like, as we've done this, we established this nourishment line, and then that would take the city out of emergency work business.
I think we also need to
Limited
think,
greatly.
we also need to plan for the worst. I think we're planning for the best, assuming that
We get
the
that.
schedule happens and the sand stays in place. I think we need to think about how the city's gonna react if we do a project in 2026 and a year later, all that sand is gone.
So let me.
And that's gonna be a real question for the city, because the city's gonna be $20 million off and probably not enough in the bank to do emergency work for the next 8 years.
And there's a lot of variables, we may have funding, but I don't know, I don't want to go back into, because I've made my point very clear about the protection, but I do want to say this, I don't like the way that this particular section is worded, and I'll tell you why, then I'll make a suggestion, okay? So the way it's read is that the city performs emergency work, sand scraping, trucking in sand, and or placement of sandbags to protect private property as long as the newly established beach preservation emergency fund allows it. So the way it's worded now is, we've got to vote that we're only going to allow it if a newly established fund allows it. I think the way that we should vote is that, at least an option should be that we vote for it, because, my thought is that, first, even if we have these sub-level protections on the south end of the beach, they won't qualify on the north end of the beach because of the critical line, so that the ordinance won't change at all. And we've got the taxes that were generated, we've discussed that ad nauseum, that I think have a role to do the beach preservation. And the question then is, does that require you to protect until you do it? But I would suggest that this just says the city performs the emergency work, sand scraping, trucking, and sand, or the placement of sandbags to protect the private property, on an emergency basis until a new beach renourishment. Because I don't like the fact that we're only voting for it if something that we have that hasn't even come together yet suggests that we do it.
I
Was
think
it-
that's
is
a
it-
lofty goal, but if the city doesn't have the funds
have the
to
money.
do emergency work,
But I think
Does the city-
I think the city, when they decided to do a referendum and change the tax and change the law, we've talked about it, I think they took on that obligation, and now this is an attempt for us to say, we don't have it. And I don't agree with that, I'll never agree with that, because I think legally it's wrong. But, so it's a goal, and you can disagree, we can have a divided group, I think we're finally gonna make more progress in these committees, understanding that we may not reach a unanimous decision, but, from my perspective, I think it's clear that's what's required. You can disagree, but I certainly, if we're gonna vote on something, I wanna be able to vote on something that I think is an option that I can live with.
So again, we're trying to kind of read the tea leaves of this group, but we thought, we heard that you believe that there's never a limit to the amount that the city has to spend on emergency work. We don't think that that was echoed by the group. I think we've heard others say we just want out of it. So this is one where we concluded that you were divided. We tried to put the kind of split the middle that I think we heard, do it to the point that there's funding there to do it.
That
So
you
yeah,
that's-
there
afford
was,
it.
there
that's
was
as close
talk
as we
about a
could get to-
cap, there was talk about an allocation, an annual allocation that could be planned.
But that's not in here. I agree, we talked about those, and those were things that I would look at and be able to be more comfortable voting for, but it's not here.
So maybe
you're
we
asking us
can
to vote on something
change-
that's just not, that's not.
Yeah, because
referenced.
there's, further down, there's this developing two funds and some limits, so maybe,
Maybe we did,
let's move past
Expand
this one,
then.
can we? Just to make some progress.
Well, do
and
you
come
want
back to
to,
it.
the other one we modify, I think, the other option would be to take this one, divide it into two. You have Dan's position that the city is on the hook forever at every cost
For emergency
for
work.
emergency work,
Period.
regardless of cost and funding. So we could see if there's consensus on that, or general agreement or divided.
How about,
A little out of context, because it's not forever at any cost. You've got a fund that's been created by the state, that's the cost. And then the fairness is to figure out when it is that we do a beach renourishment versus when we put Band-Aids on. It's not to abandon one in favor of the other. And so I don't like the phrasing of it, but.
So are you saying as long as there's beach preservation fee money available? Because I think that's what or are you saying, if we run, hypothetically, if we run through all of the beach preservation fee fund, which is what the referendum created, that is the cap of how much the obligation is to spend? Or are you saying, I think I've heard you
Well,
say,
as far as the beach-
past that.
As far as the beach preservation fund, I think that's how it applies, but as far as the city's obligation, I also take issue with the fact that the taxpayers in the city aren't generating or contributing any money towards general tax revenue, towards beach renourishment or towards these fundings. It's coming out of money that was created by the beach fund through the taxes, sorry,
Speak it to them.
through the taxes.
So Dan, do you wanna create
For example.
a statement
we
that they
had-
group
Just
could-
so I can finish, for example, we have drainage issues where the city, all the taxpayers are paying for it, whether I have drainage in my yard, or I have drainage on the street, or I have drainage 4 miles away. It's one island.
But that's the thing, Dan, our drainage projects don't, the goal of our drainage projects is not to eliminate ponding in somebody's yard.
If
Our
you're-
goal is to ensure that our roads are clear so that emergency personnel can go through it. And there are times when we do projects and it doesn't solve somebody's yard
Let me
flooding.
ask you this.
And very
You-
much,
you
we
go to-
only do
You go to
projects
Beachwood East
we-
last week, okay? The water was so bad where it came through that the road was blocked. You go back to December when we had the big storm, the road was so bad the firemen came up because people couldn't get out of their driveways and the firemen couldn't drive the trucks into the road. So does that change it again?
So Dan,
And
the
if we're-
other-
If we're gonna set rules, you really gotta look
can I
at it.
toss something out that might get us to at least a potential vote? It might take this up about 10,000 or 30,000 feet, but it could get us to at least yay or nay.
Move on.
Yeah, to
Consensus
get
or
us
not,
rolling.
yeah.
And maybe what we say is the city performs emergency work with the parentheses, put the period after parentheses right now. And first of all, I don't think it's just protect private property, it's also protect public beach access and a lot of other things beyond just private property. The thing that we're probably wrestling with is the TBD and where the demarcation is. I'm not sure we're going to solve that here and today. So the question is there some responsibility, the thing I would be willing to vote on, is there some responsibility for the city to perform emergency work? My answer would be yes, there are circumstances where the city performs emergency work. Do we have all the details on what that means? Is the money there? Is it not? We could apply that to the big beach renourishment fund. We could apply that to drainage. We could apply that to anything. So for me, that statement is kind of a tale here that we don't necessarily need or can define. I'd rather just say, hey, is the city on the hook for, in certain circumstances, to provide emergency work? I think we are. I don't know that we're going to be able to define all of the.
When and where.
Exactly
I could agree
today.
with that.
So
But
in line with that, I think we were aligned as we're looking at it. How does this sound then? And I wouldn't type it yet. That a newly established beach preservation emergency fund be established for the city to perform emergency work, and then everything that's there, for the aid of protecting private property and public access. So basically, it's fairly broad, but at this moment, and then maybe we have consensus on that, and the establishment of the fund assumes some motion forward, and then maybe we can revisit whether there's another box we need to add, but
I don't know if there's consensus about establishing the emergency fund.
establishing, well, I thought that's what we agreed to last week.
That's-
We just
Maybe
talked
what-
about
That's
it.
under
It's
That's
down
page
later.
Section
two,
3.
bottom of
Okay,
page 2.
So maybe not
We have to I think
conflate
we
the
have,
two.
yeah, I don't know that we
Okay,
can
then
hitch
maybe
those
not
wagons.
conflate the
Yeah.
two. That's fair.
That's what concerned me about this one, was because it was only based on if you establish this fund.
Right.
So,
I mean, the
So
city's
we'll-
got funds for all, it's the budget's malleable depending upon where we want to allocate the money. So for anything, by the way, so.
No, that makes
yeah.
sense.
So maybe, the question that I would want to say is are there circumstances where the city's responsible for emergency work? My answer I would be in the yes.
Yeah, and I would be in the extremely limited category if we're going to phrase it like that.
Same.
Emphasis on extremely.
We've got to define that. We just got to.
Correct. And we're not
So
going to
we'll
do that today.
keep,
And are
so
you voting
that
on
line.
All right.
And I'm a yes.
All right, let's keep rocking.
So I'll just rephrase it. A city is responsible to perform emergency work, parentheses, sand scraping, trucking sand, and/or
You a
placement
yes
of
on the
sandbags.
Ordinance, Con? Because we haven't clicked that vote yet.
Oh, I'm a yes on the ordinance.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, we did,
You
okay.
did, on the ordinance?
Well, and
All
I
right,
think
let's-
we need
let's
to
keep
take
rocking.
another stab at this list
Yes.
when the group is complete, and
Totally
Katie and
agree.
Tim.
Totally agree.
So city responsible to perform, rather than divided, we'll say general agreement.
I think, yeah, I'm good with that.
Are you
On
on that?
the right side of that box. Again, I'm
Leaning
in
towards
very, very limited
Yeah,
situations.
The hard
And that's
part,
good
he's
to
right,
know.
is
We-
defining it, because, and that's for another day.
That's the work
All
that
right.
needs to be done, yeah.
So 3-2,
That was a
general agreement?
Yep. Follow
You could
the-
put the X over on the, where is it, on the right-hand side of the
Yeah, if
box?
that's the- if that's
That'll
degrees
make you
of.
feel better, yeah.
All right, next, prohibit construction of new pool seaward of the maximum building line. I'm completely in favor of that.
Yes.
And we talked about that last meeting where they're
How it
really
happened,
only
yeah,
allowed
the
in that
history.
section and the history of what that came about. That's something the staff fully agrees with. From a building perspective, it's something that the city should consider modifying.
By the way, I'm in favor of that one. My question is, if we look at it objectively, is that really the scope of this committee on the placement and permitting of pools, or are we getting into the?
No, I think from my perspective, we are probably 75% of what we're doing on this end is
Protecting
protecting
pools.
pools that were built seaward of that.
Outside of the max building.
Seaward of that line. So it
And I
very
hear you,
much is.
Scott. I mean, I think it's a good question, but I think if you back up to this modifying the hard erosion, I mean, that's where council's gotten stuck. Is it the house? Is
Oh, I
it the
agree,
pool?
yeah.
Is it the gazebo?
Is it the
you know,
setback line, the critical
Yeah.
line, the
Yeah,
whatever, yeah.
The calls we're getting, 70% of them are, it's right up against my pool.
So, Scott or Dan, where are y'all on this one?
I'll go consensus on that, to prohibit the construction of new pools.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people know when they're in it at this point, what they're gonna be able to do or not, so I would vote with that, absolutely.
And here's one, Scott, I think you brought up earlier, and Cindy as well. Establish property owners' responsibilities for maintaining dune system within private property. This is the Folly Beach model. Completely agree with
Yeah.
that
Yes.
one.
And I wonder if that should be just reordered under the, or put the other one back on top of this one, because those two are gonna go hand in hand. The emergency the emergency is gonna go with the responsibilities here, or no?
Just from an ordering
Yeah, just an
standpoint.
ordering.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know, I'm just
So we can
throwing
move.
it out there.
Yep,
So move that to
So right under emergency
right
work.
under or before emergency, either one. yeah.
emergency work. Yeah.
You just want to pair it, Scott, right?
I mean, I'm just throwing it out there
Yep,
as a suggestion.
that's fine.
They do kind of go in.
Consider seeking a second opinion, and this is where we need some clarification, or staff's asking for some clarification. A second opinion on what? A healthy beach
This was
profile?
Cindy, this was Cindy's
Yeah,
comments.
a healthy beach profile, a 8-year cycle.
I agree with you. The scope of that needs to be defined, and I think
Or
that.
is it even needed? I mean, we've had Nicole Elko here, we've had Stephen here ad nauseum. Stephen, I keep going back to your previous boss man, Tim, but,
Yeah, and you know, I think that when I talk to beachfront owners, residents, I think the concern is look, we've been on this path now for 18 months. And it's like anything where, and I'm in the group of feeling too, that I think we've been losing ground. We're waiting, we've got our, we're waiting on the shoal management. We're waiting to see what the outcome of the Army Corps project is. But I think that anytime you're in a situation like this, it's best to have a second opinion. And, nothing against Steve, but I think we ought to have a look at at Breach Inlet. I think we ought to have a look at how we've been deploying our sandbags. I think we have to look at how we've been triggering our emergency situation, and I think everybody's been doing it the best they can. But we're losing ground, not only on both ends of the island, but it's been spreading. And I think that we've got to, I would support having a second opinion of our short and long-range planning. And are there opportunities, other than what we're seeing or one firm is seeing, to ensure that going forward, not only do we have a cohesive plan on managing it, and it may just be somebody coming in and taking a look and saying, you know what, everything's right on the money. But, whether it's healthcare or anything else, it's best to have a second opinion when we've got a situation this severe. And I'm open to comments from anybody else.
So I would support it too. I think that, essentially a professional opinion, and it's a lot of revenue, no matter how we're gonna do it. But with the beaches all over the country facing similar, around the country facing similar situations, it doesn't mean that what's suggested isn't right. There's maybe a whole lot of recommendations that maybe we should consider and see if somebody has a novel idea or something working somewhere else that we're not just aware of. And it back to, I think, one of the comments, we're not going there now, have somebody full-time assigned to this project just to keep up with.
It's on the list.
Oh, is it on there?
Yep.
I didn't see it. But I think that in that same vein, I tell people in my practice, if they want a second opinion, go get it. I mean, I think it's fine. The whole goal is to do it right. So.
And we're being faced with, I mean, Steve's put a wonderful report together, but, you look at the economics and the impact of the tax base here and the residents and the short-term rental business. If there are options that can help us mitigate it, I think it's, behooves us to spend a little bit of money to get an objective second opinion here to either confirm that this is the best road forward on such a large path, or to look at the alternatives. And I am concerned about Breach Inlet. I worry about the sand getting placed in front of the south end and going right back into Breach Inlet over Sullivan's Island. I don't know what Plan B is. I think that there might be some options here to consider, or confirm that, we've got the best plans in front of us.
Well, Plan B on the Breach Inlet is accelerating the large-scale nourishment project in 2026. I think we have to be practical about it. I don't disagree that having a second opinion is always good. Oftentimes validates what we've been doing. That's what we have found. But not to oversimplify the issue, but our beach is losing sand. We need to place more sand. And I think we have heard novel ideas from other states and other countries that are not permitted on the state. So I think we have to be practical and realistic as to what we would be allowed to do. And maybe, this conversation triggers efforts to help the state maybe be willing to try different things. I think that's great, but that's the challenge that we face when people come with great ideas and the state will
may
not.
not
Let me ask,
even
what is the
consider.
objection to having a second opinion? I mean, I look at this
I don't know
as.
that there is one.
There's no
Okay.
objection.
Okay.
I think
I feel like
we're
we're-
So
trying
just
to
for
be practical.
clarification, I think what I'm hearing from Scott is kind of a look back at the last 18 months. We felt like we acted the way we did, and I think we have learned along the way. There are a lot of lessons learned about the bags you use, about where you place them, about when you place them, about the height that you place them. So I think that's kind of task one, is look kind of Monday morning quarterback through all that we did. Could we have done stuff differently initially? And I would say that we probably could have. We've learned along the way that probably would have done things slightly differently. So that would be kind of task one. Task two, and I think we've already had it informally, but what I would call unclogging the inlet discussion, is that and then third, our future plan of dumping kind of this volume at this cadence at these locations. Would those be the three things that we're looking, or would it be something other than
I
that?
think, and also, again, with the impacts that we have to our revenue streams, I mean, we don't even have the next one completely financed. Are there, and, I don't want to, do we need to be looking at a groin, or do we need to be looking at something, other permanent structure somewhere on the island that will help mitigate this ongoing erosion issue, to the point where, if we had a groin somewhere, and again, I'm no engineer, I look at what Sullivan's Island's done, you know, is that going to save us, you know, tens of millions of dollars in beach renourishment money? And is it something that, you know what, we don't want to do it, but if we want to, what do we have within the realm of our capacity to do? I mean, we're already struggling with setting up a $3 million or $2 million emergency fund. You know, are there other options that may not be that palatable long-term, but required in order for us to be able to maintain a healthy beach? I think that we ought to have that looked at as well.
Yeah,
So I'd say that's part of the future, and I would say our current kind of directive on groins is that a terminal groin at Breach Inlet should be on the table of considerations, but they'll only get permitted if we can show that we have habitual chronic erosion in the area, which we haven't been able to get to that point yet. But I would say that's kind of that's lumped in with our future plan is this amount of sand at this cadence and potentially looking at a terminal groin at Breach Inlet.
Or whatever
If
they
it's
come up,
more-
there's things that we don't even, haven't considered.
Is there anything
What
else that
about
we
terminal
should?
groin on the-
Yeah,
on the
let's
beach?
quit trying to solve it. All we're
Agreed,
talking about
yeah.
is a second opinion.
Agreed.
And I
Well,
think there's general
and
consent what it
clarifying-
is.
And clarifying what that
Yeah.
scope would be. I think this is helpful.
They want to look at strategy and tactics.
Yeah.
That's the quickest way to say it.
Yeah.
Sounds like we have
Second opinion
consensus.
is strategy and
All right.
tactics.
Good.
All right, proactive response to beach erosion, accelerate and increase frequency of large-scale dredging beach renourishment projects from every 10 to 8 years. I'm pretty sure there's consensus on that one. We've beat that one. Initiate permitting for large-scale nourishment projects 2 years after completion of a large-scale nourishment project. We've talked about kind of always having a permit in hand, if you will.
And this would go hand in hand with accelerating the frequency. In order to be prepared for year
Right.
8, you'd have to start the permitting process much earlier.
Coordinate construction of a large-scale nourishment projects on both unstabilized inlet zones to occur at the same time.
And the goal would be to save in mobilization and demobilization
Yeah.
costs.
Dan, here's the next one. Hire a full-time employee tasked with overseeing resilience efforts, including beach management.
You know, the great thing about that is that if we did it and we found that after 6 months or a year, it really made no difference, you can let them go. But,
That's a great way to treat somebody.
well, no, it's not that. It's, you know, it's like many professionals, you hire them, you know, when you need them, when you don't need them, you don't,
Well,
you don't have.
so
the
do
problem-
a,
the
do a
problem is that-
contractor, have a, somebody, I mean, don't hire
Consultant or
somebody.
a full-time employee?
I'd look at it. My take would be this, is that I look at Douglas and Desiree, and everything drops on your shoulders. And you can't pivot and give it to somebody else that's qualified to manage this stuff. And, you know, Steve's doing monitoring every 6 months, but who's out there, you know, when we're not doing that? And answering the phone calls and dealing with the communication and having to put the plans together and vendor management and counting the doggone bags that are being deployed as they're supposed to be counted. It's you two. And I think that we've got the biggest asset in the entire community is our beach. Everything relies upon it, and everything rests upon your shoulders. I think for, you know, whatever, for, I don't know how many sandbags it would equate to but to get a full-time qualified individual in here to keep eyes on our largest asset is a drop in the bucket when we're looking at what we could possibly save and mitigate and react and proaction over the course of that, you know, that person's requirements. And it's not, I don't think it's a lot of money. I think it's something that would be an investment in the island's health. And, I mean, I would support it 100%.
Yeah. I think we've got a lot of staffing needs, and I'm just not sure this is top of my list personally. I mean, I think I get the need, because these guys are worn out, these guys being Desiree and Douglas. I mean, it is taking a toll for sure for 18 months, 2 years now. Again, we've got a number of staffing needs that we just need to stack up from a priority standpoint, and what is it?
So what I've seen over the last several years is, as I paid more attention, is it seems like there's always an issue, a big issue the island's dealing with. And when that issue's over, there's always the next big issue the island's dealing with. This is a big issue right now. I think it's the biggest issue right now, but when the renourishment's done, something else will rise to the top of it. And then people are busy. And I think that, I keep going back to Dare County, where they found significant savings by planning ahead and doing things differently. So I would vote for it. Expect your decision, but I'm
And
not.
we can broaden the scope.
No, I'm for having an employee. I'll let city council figure out where they want their staffing needs to be. But as far as from this point of view of the committee, yeah, I think this job going forward plays a role in our city.
So.
So yes.
On these 4 folks that are here today, that's consensus, so,
Do we say 75%? I think
yeah,
we
I
did.
think so.
But
And again-
consensus.
Okay, so nobody better leave is what you're saying? Yeah, we've got.
If somebody leaves, we got-
Nobody's walking out.
So it'll, yeah.
No.
And again, we'll have the full committee take a look, and it may
And
shift
scope
some
of job
these.
is important on
Yeah.
this, yeah.
Next is establish an ongoing beach preservation committee. Again, this is like the Edisto Island world, is it? I see head nods, all
Yes.
good?
Yeah, I'm for it.
And I
Go
know,
ahead.
so the Edisto model, it's only residents that make up that group, and their administrator staffs it. This model, we've tried it, half council, half residents. It may be up to city council to decide the makeup of this group, but if you all have any thoughts about, should it be resident only, should it be a combination, or should it be a council-only group?
Well, and Edisto is only beachfront owners.
Correct.
I mean, it's not even.
So we've done
I
it
think
for
they
so
had- I
long.
think they actually brought back in, they started that way, but I thought they had others.
I
in-
didn't think
I don't
so.
Maybe
remember.
maybe I'm wrong.
I know they're residents.
But we've covered so much over such a long period of time, and listen, we're devoting private time and city time and everybody's time to do it. I think it's important to go there. One of the hard things for me is that at the end of the day, we package everything we have into this presentation, we give it to council. Having members of council on the committee who have lived through all of it, I think makes a significant difference, because it's hard a report doesn't share with people what we've discussed.
I think maybe resident-driven, resident-centric probably would be my preference with, more resident representation. And maybe there's a council or 2 members of the liaison, kind of
Like
like
the
we have the environmental.
6-2,
Yeah.
And then and the administration representative, but I think the residents kind of need to drive the
I would support that.
resident makeup.
And that makes sense.
Do you
So-
think?
Like a 2-6 kind of makeup, 2 council members, 6 residents, and that way, and on a regular schedule.
And you got some
That way,
redundancy with the council members.
obviously not with the frequency that we've been meeting, but obviously,
I would recommend an
Oh,
odd
join
number.
that.
I would recommend an odd number
Yeah.
group,
Oh, you gotta have
just
an
in
odd
case you
number.
have a
2-5.
vote. But
Yeah.
2-5, I think bigger than 7 can get
You got
difficult.
consensus on something today?
I think so.
Got a lot of consensus.
Got a lot of
Dan.
consensus.
More consensus
Than not. Increase the frequency of beach monitoring surveying from annual to semi-annual. We've already
Already
put
done
that
it.
in place, and I think Stephen we have a contract. Next item, new and consistent funding mechanisms for future needs and projects. First, establish 2 separate funds, 1 for emergency beach restoration work and 2 for large-scale beach nourishment projects.
Can I make a quick suggestion
Sure.
on this? Maybe when the current large-scale beach renourishment project fund, or our beach fund, has everything in it, including our consultants, our monitoring, our.
Beach access
Permitting.
pass.
Yeah, beach access
permitting,
pass.
yeah.
So should we segregate, should we have the large-scale beach renourishment as, I think in my mind, we got to save for the big one. We got to figure out a way to get the big one.
so you're saying like a capital project, operations and maintenance, and then emergency?
So
Yeah,
3
and I-
funds.
3
Well,
funds?
I
Well-
think our fund has a lot of accounts, so I think we could
can
include.
sub-account it, yeah.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
have a capital outlay for large-scale projects, an emergency fund, and then everything else would fall either on professional services or
And maybe that's the segregation.
contract service, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's delineated so everybody understands, like, this is how the budget is built, and this is the funding that is there, so yeah.
And for
Okay.
me, one of the biggest takeaways in the committee so far, and when we've been diving into this fund, is that we've got the transparency, and I don't think a lot of people are aware. I think a lot of people think that we've got this $1.8 million that's
Every
going-
year.
Yeah, to beach renourishment, and it's not. And
Yeah.
most of it's not going to beach renourishment, it's going to all these other capital projects. So I think the more we can delineate those and report on them that way, and it gives the community an idea what we're really up against.
Better accountability.
Yeah,
That's what we're
exactly.
looking for, see.
Well, just to clarify, Scott, the beach preservation fee fund, it's only used for beach projects. So when you say it goes to other capital projects,
No, I meant it's related to the beach.
Okay, yeah.
No, I'm, yeah.
All
Very,
funds.
very
Categories,
But
right?
it's all
Yeah.
beach related, but it's not just sand on
Just
beach.
sand.
beach
Exactly.
renourishment, correct.
So are we kind of saying 3 subcategories?
I would say
Instead of two
2,
funds.
because I would say we add a capital outlay. We already have a capital outlay line on our beach preservation fee fund. We keep that for large-scale projects and shoal management projects, and then we add another one for emergency work. We're not redoing
But
the.
where does this work? Which,
So like large-
which of those two?
Like
funds?
large-scale beach project would have the permits that are associated with specifically with the large-scale beach
Correct.
project. Whereas the emergency one would, we got emergency permits and stuff that goes into the emergency. But then you can kind of see, go ahead, yeah, I didn't answer your question, did I?
Well, like a boardwalk or something that's not
That's-
in one of those two, are we saying
That's
that?
different, isn't it?
That would be different. I know, I have it in my mind.
Okay,
I know
all right.
exactly
She knows
what we
what
need
she-
to know.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
And we have
pie
consensus
chart.
there.
We have consensus.
Just
Consider
once.
raising revenue to cover proposed proactive beach renourishment schedule.
Yes.
We've got a funding sheet that's identified. I think there's general consensus around that. Dan, good? Raising revenue? Yes.
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 Find money.
Yes, consensus.
Engage state and federal lobbyists / legislators to secure funding for beach renourishment. Definite
Yes.
Consensus there. Engage state lobbyists, legislators to amend state law to allow beach renourishment to be added to the Municipal Improvements Act to allow city to establish a special purpose tax district. Whew, that's a mouthful. I think I'm assuming there's consensus on both. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think the consent, even though we establish a tax district, what we do with that is up to the council, correct?
Correct, and
Yeah.
then look at the next one too, because these kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's a little, it's specific to a tax district. The next one is just give us some flexibility to either do a real estate transfer fee, add a tax money, something. Just give us a flexibility.
Agreed.
And then the last one is establish a cost-sharing plan with Wild Dunes for projects along areas that do not meet public access requirements based on Wild Dunes contributions to the Beach Preservation Fund. In your packet also were 2 pages looking at 2 different things. Property, were both in there or just?
Yes, both.
Both. So just looking at property taxes, and that splits about a 60-40 split. 60% outside the gate, 40% inside the gate. If you look at beach preservation fee fund only, it's about a 55-45 split. So 55 outside the gate, 45 inside the gate.
And on that, if you're looking, that's just specific to the beach preservation fee fund, but it would be applied the same way to state accommodation tax and municipal accommodation tax revenue. It's the same split.
Since it's based off the same revenue generator.
Correct. But
So I
this,
think-
yeah,
sorry.
these, I just wanted to clarify, this is just tying it to the beach preservation fee
And
fund.
again, not trying to solve it today, I just think there's consensus to move in that
information.
direction.
Good information.
It codify it. You want to make,
Yep.
we're in agreement.
Mic drop?
I mean, I do,
Well, the equipment.
is there any thought about what the cost-sharing plan would look like, or is that for another meeting?
I'd save that for another meeting.
Okay.
I mean, I-
I'd encourage the city to talk to them. I think we need to lock something down.
Which they have been. And I think this gives you great basis to have that conversation, obviously.
All right.
So I think we update this sheet, set another meeting, hopefully can have everybody here to get, kind of nail that down, nail down the consensus or general agreements. Is that fair as far as next step? Staff, is that fair?
Friday, if you want to
Let's see.
reconvene.
You'll
the
have filled in
Friday
every
after the
box,
Thanksgiving.
Mayor.
So that's December
That's
6th? December 6th, Friday at 9, our next meeting?
Sure.
I
Okay.
cannot be there.
Thursday or Wednesday or?
No, that's true. Good point.
Thursday?
I can't do
I'm
Tuesday.
gone that whole week.
I'm gone Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday that week.
Well,
I'm back on Friday.
Dan's out the whole week, so
Following Monday or Tuesday?
Yeah, after,
9th?
December 9th, that Monday?
I'm here.
Real quick.
We can check with Katie and Cindy and others, see what,
That works for me.
the 9th,
Let's try that.
staff, y'all are good?
Yeah, 9th or 10th, I
We-
can do.
Do we have something?
Yeah, we have a hearing downtown.
Oh.
We can do another time of day, maybe.
We gotta be, we got a 10 and 11.
So at the morning of the 10th.
I could do that.
Yeah.
Could do the afternoon of the 9th.
We don't know how long that's
Yeah,
going to be.
10th is.
Morning of the 10th?
Hearing, that's
Yes.
tantalizing,
I'd rather
Douglas.
do the morning.
It's the lawsuit
Morning-
against the
morning
city
10th.
from some of the Front Beach property owners.
So what did we decide?
I think morning 10th.
Morning 10th?
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Anything else, staff, committee? 10:04, off record.